Welcome to UserAndI, the channel where I explore all things UX and UI design, and today we're talking about variance in Figma. So we're going to be designing our inputs first, and we have three states that we're going to account for: our default state, our valid state, and our invalid state. So what I'm going to do first is create our first default component, and the rest of our components will build off that because it's the default state. So I'm going to start with placeholder text. I'm going to take the thickness down on that and then bump down the font size. I'm going to make that a group. I'm going to auto layout that, and I'm going to add some spacing. So I know I want 20 on either side, and I know I want 15 top and bottom. And I'm going to round the edges, and let's select a stroke color. Yep, that works for me. And we're going to take down the transparency of this because it is placeholder text to about 40%. And I'm just going to align that. Oops. I'm just going to align that left so it's allowing for the titles. And we are going to call that. I'm going to give it a specific naming convention, and it will make sense why later on when we turn these into components. So I'm going to go input / and I'm going to call that default. Now I'm going to duplicate this, and for our valid state, what I want is to communicate to the user that they've done something right, and this input is valid, of course. I'm just going to bring this over here, and I'm going to go and select the green color. Fine, that works for me. And also this text wouldn't be a little transparent, so I'll call that just text. And what I also want is an icon. So where's my plugins? So I believe I'm looking for check. Yep, that's the one. And I'm just gonna bring that out of its frame, delete the frame, and I'm gonna make a group with these two. I'm gonna auto layout that, and I want the gap to be 10, maybe 15 actually. And I want them center aligned, of course. And I'm gonna copy the border color, and I'm gonna make that the tick the same color. Perfect. And then what I'm also going to do is set the resizing to fill container. So whenever we stretch this out, our check stays aligned to the right, but our input box stretches as the container does, effectively making it responsive. So I'm going to go input / valid. And then what we're going to do here is duplicate that for our invalid state, and all I'm going to do here is change this color to red, and I'm going to bring in a new icon, and this plugin library doesn't have a close or an X for some reason, so I'm going to go plus. That gives us this. Drag it out of its frame into the components frame. I'm going to delete that, and I'm going to just replace that here, and I'm going to set the color to same color for the red. Now I'm going to rotate this 45 degrees. Notice how it changed the shape. It's because our bounding box for this icon has now been rotated. Do that one more time. So here's what it looks like before. As you can see, the bounding box is a perfect square without any rotation, and it follows the same proportions and distance as the one above. But if we rotate it halfway, we start to see, because the bounding box for this is now a rotated box, this edge here points in and starts affecting the auto layout, but we don't want that. So we're going to right click, and we're going to select flatten. and that changes the bounding box in the way that we want it for this tutorial. Perfect. I'm also going to add, so I think it's always good practice to add error messages where possible. I think it communicates to the user a bit more than, oh, this field isn't invalid. It doesn't tell them what they need to add or anything else, so I always love error messages. So I'm just going to call this error message, because we're going to be able to change that depending on the type of error status we have. I'm going to take that down to 15, and then I'm going to come in here. I'm also going to rename that to frame. I should probably do that with all the other ones as well. I'm going to rename this to frame 2. I'm going to group that. I'm going to make that an auto layout. Yep, that's fine. The arrangement will be going vertical. And I'm going to set that to hub context. It's fine actually. And I'm going to, of course, make that red. Awesome. Okay, so let's go back and rename these, but first I'll call that input / invalid. Right, fine. Call that frame, and we'll just make sure this is all fine. Perfect. So here's where the naming convention thing comes into play. The valid state and the invalid state are variants of this default state. So what we want to do now is convert these all to components. And I'm just going to select them and click the component button up here. So what we have now are 3 components. And now what we can do, because the valid state and the invalid state are variants of the default state, we can select all 3 components and we get this button here that says combine as variants. And what Figma then does is takes our naming convention, the name that was before the / becomes our component, and then everything after becomes our variants. Really handy, really handy. So I'm going to delete these titles now because we don't need them. I personally like to auto layout my my variant groups, so I'm just going to do that here. I'm going to set 20. Okay, awesome. So we have our components.